Hi, I'm Dave Barnes.
And I'm John McLaughlin.
And welcome to Dadville.
Dadville's a podcast where we talk about life, love, and the pursuit of awesome dadding.
It's funny thoughts and deep talks.
So please, enjoy your time here in Dadville and enjoy this episode with...
Gretchen Rubin.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh,
Yeah,
my pleasure.
thank you.
Thanks for having me. This will be so fun.
Yeah, we're really glad you're here. So one of the things we do when we start off with Dadville is we read what's called the brag sheet, which is just everything Gretchen Rubin, everything all the time that's ever happened.
Excellent.
Yeah, and so I'll read this. Buckle up. This is always like it's sort of like a psychological test to begin the podcast because the guest has to listen to all of the great, wonderful things. Okay, so Gretchen, here's your life. Grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. Okay, shout out KC. Author, podcast host, entrepreneur, and speaker. Attended Yale Law School. That makes one of three of us that did that. And was editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal. Good gracious. Clerked for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Amazing. Written 11 books. 5 of them are New York Times bestsellers. Come on, girl.
Jeez.
Her books have sold over 2 million copies and are available in 30 languages. This is getting more. It's like flexing them longer ago. Hosts the podcast Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which has over 220 million downloads. Developed the Happier app, which provides personalized strategies to help you become happier, healthier, more productive, and more creative. Won a Webby Award in 2022. Also, this is a double asterisk, which these are always fun. Also has been interviewed by Oprah and has been an answer on Jeopardy. Look, folks, Gretchen Rubin. Here
I mean, that is amazing.
Coming in.
How do you feel when you hear that being read to you?
It's kind of funny to hear it all summarized like that. It sounds so nice and neatly packaged up, but it didn't feel so linear as it was unfolding, as you can imagine. Yeah.
What a great response. It didn't feel as linear as it was unfolding.
But you have some things. You have many things that you have achieved that are so impressive that I would imagine it's hard for yourself to let yourself even process it. You know what I mean? You are. I'm gonna start with the mountaintop. You were an answer on Jeopardy.
Let's go.
How do you can you let yourself be like, yeah, I did that. I was.
Well, and the funny thing is, of course, I didn't see it. Like, you know what I mean? I didn't happen to be watching TV at the time, and so I started
people who
hearing
have all the success that you have, they don't have time to watch Jeopardy.
No, well, and so I started hearing from people like, "Oh, that's so fun! How cool!" And I was like, "What's going on?" And so then, of course, I tracked it down and stuff. So yeah, it was that was cool. Really fun. That definitely felt like. It was a bucket list, so much of a bucket list, it wasn't even on my bucket list, because who would have thought?
Yes.
I have a couple of friends who have been New York Times answers. That's kind of the same thing.
That's
like, you
really
feel like, okay, that's
really cool.
So is that what you do? You just adjust? You're like, well, I haven't done the New York Times thing, though.
I'm not waiting around for that. No. That's like, I've had my fun, I think, with that.
That is incredible. Yeah. In the first, for all the 100 plus guests we've had on here, that's never been.
That is a first.
Oh,
never
really?
Been a Jeopardy answer. Oh, yeah, that's a big deal.
I'm even more excited.
You have your own little island now that you can live on and wave from as people drive by and say, oh, that's her. There's Gretchen. Okay, so one of the things we want to talk about, a lot of things. We're thrilled that you're on. John and I do these preps before the podcast, and this is one where I literally said, John, I feel like there could be 100 questions I could ask because one, you've just written about so many things, but there's so many things that we could talk about. One of the things we really wanted to pick your brain though to kind of start off is it's 2023. It's a new year now, new year, new me. And you have a wisdom around sort of resolutions and these things. And one of the things we really want to do at the beginning of the year, putting this out for the listeners out there, the hundreds of millions of listeners we have, is what, like, you didn't laugh because that's not true, but it's okay.
No, I believe it. No, of course.
we just leave it on play while we go to sleep.
Yeah.
It helps. But why is it so hard for us to keep our New Year's resolutions? Like, what is that? Why is that so hard for us?
Well, that is the $1 million question. And I mean, I think about that all the time. And I think, really, to a very great degree, it has to do with fit. That, you may want to stick to a New Year's resolution. And so you're like, okay, what I should do is I should take a class, or I should just get up and do it first thing, or I should focus on my why, or I need to take more time for myself, or I just need to, go all in, and the problem is that everybody's different. And so something could work really well for your sweetheart or your brother or your coworker or whatever. And so you try it. And then if it doesn't work, you sort of feel like, well, there's something wrong with me. I always let myself down. And then maybe you keep trying and it doesn't work, instead of thinking like, well, what kind of person am I? Like, am I a morning person or a night person? So many people I talk to are like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get up first thing and go for a run every morning. And I'm like, but you're a night person. Like, no, you're not. Like, I don't want to be, a downer, but have you met yourself? Because you're not going to do that, because you're at your most energetic and creative later in the day, because you're a night person. And like 30% of people are night people. So fine. Wow. So so you're not setting yourself up for success. So I think a lot of times there's a mismatch where people don't take the time to be like, well, what kind of person am I? They rush into like, here's the magic answer, because I know it worked really well for somebody else, or some expert is telling me this is the best way or the right way, where really there is no magic one size fits all solution.
Well, it's interesting too, because it seems like to me sort of baked into the whole resolution thing is friction, because you're trying to do something you don't naturally do. So you're already at this weird you're at this weird standoff with like, okay, the reason I'm having to make a resolution is because it's not natural to me, or it is at a much slower pace than what I want it to be.
Yeah, usually you're either asking something of yourself, like you need to like go an extra mile, like exercise or go outside every day, or read more, or you're depriving yourself of something, like I'm going to quit smoking, or I'm going to cut down on sugar, or I'm not going to eat fast food, or I'm going to stick to a budget.
Yeah.
And so those things, it's like, it's either going further than you want to go, or are depriving yourself. And those are both hard.
And it's funny. I've never thought about this until you were just talking about it, how like, someone who's not a morning person, is going to get up and run a mile in the morning. But there's something about I think everyone feels pressure to be a morning person.
Oh, 100%.
I don't know why that is, but it's like we got to get up and we got to like knock something out, whatever it is, read 10 pages or, run 10 miles or whatever in the morning. And I think a lot of us feel that way.
No, and research backs you up, because there's research that suggests that morning people are happier than night people. And one of the reasons people think that might be is the world is set up for morning people. It sort of rewards morning people. And yet, like, they think like 30% of people are night people, 40% are like real morning people, and then everybody else is kind of in between. And it's partly a factor of age and partly a factor of genetics. Wow. And so, but
genetics
if everything,
in what way?
Well, like, okay, so like little kids, as we all know, if you've had kids, and older people are more morning. And then like teenagers and young adults are more night. Sleeping. So this is why they're like in high school, it doesn't make sense for children to have to get to school early. And if you can move back start times, children tend to get better scores and better attendance and all that.
Wow.
Because there's just these natural rhythms that we can't fight. And so I think a lot of people, I think you're exactly right. People are sort of told the right way, the best way is to get up and do it. And if you're fighting your natural, just like the natural rhythm of your body, you're just not setting yourself up for success. I have a friend who exercises every night at midnight. I have a writer friend who does her breast work between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And I'm not saying that everybody can set up their lives that way, because it's hard, because the world is set up for morning people, but they both manage to do it. And I'm like, if I make it to 10 p.m. watching TV, it's a good night, let alone, doing original writing. But people are different.
It's so we did this. So my family and I went to London for Christmas. We took the Barnes corporate over there, the five of us, and it was really interesting because we tried to keep as close to American hours as we could because we knew we'd be coming back to school and everything like that.
Yeah,
and I'm a big morning person. Like morning is my body wakes me up every morning. I never have to do alarms. And I'm pretty much like up and going. That's like I'm ready. I'm ready for the day. And it was such a weird thing and a wonderful thing so like we would go to bed at 1 or 1:30 London time, sleep until 10 a.m. 11, and then start the day. And I loved where getting home at 8 or 9, I knew I had like 4 or 5 more hours. It was this weird thing in my brain of like, I'm not tired. I know I should be, but I have all this energy, and it made the evenings so much less stressful because we'd be out, somewhere. We went to a soccer game one night that ended at 10, and we still had to get, back down an hour to where we were. And it was so wonderful to not be stressed about it. Cause I was like, oh, nobody has to get to bed. And I felt like a vampire. It was this weird existence that was very contrary to the way my brain usually works. And I mean, obviously, like you said, we can't live like that, but it was really bizarre to live like that for a couple of weeks.
But that's how night people probably feel.
Yeah.
They're like, you're feeling the pressure. Like, we got to get the kids to bed, because we got to leave at 7:05 for school, yada, yada, yada. That's probably how night people feel. They're like, they don't feel that pressure.
Yeah.
Which I'm a morning person as well. So
and I think that, and then the slow morning is really, really hard for them, but you can think about how people can take this into account. Like, let's say you're a manager and you have like a team of 6 who has to have a morning meeting. You might say, hey, how many of you are morning people and how many of you are night people? Because if 4 of the 6 people are not going to really be awake and creative until like 10:30 a.m., maybe you want to move the time of the meeting. We can't always adjust, but sometimes we can. And I think just understanding that people are different relieves some pressure. Here's another way people are different: abstainers and moderators. Like, let's say you're trying to give up sugar or give up caffeine or whatever. So some people, when you're facing strong temptation, some people are abstainers, meaning they find it easier to give something up altogether. Like, they can have none or they can have a lot, but they can't have a little. Then there are moderators, and they do better when they have a little bit or sometimes. And these are the people that are like, I keep a bar of fine chocolate in my desk drawer, and every day or two I have 1 square of fine chocolate, and that's all you need. And follow the 80-20 rule. And I'm like, if I have a bar of chocolate in my desk, I'm eating that whole thing. 10 a.m. It's gone, or else I spend the whole day just thinking about it. So I'm an abstainer when it comes to sweets. I can have none, and you would not believe how much I abstain from. Or I can have a lot, but for some people it's easier to have a little bit, and they should have the 1 square of fine chocolate, or the half a dish of ice cream, or the little brownie, or a couple French fries, or a cup of coffee from time to time, or 1 cup of coffee every morning. And again, it's like people always say to me, you shouldn't be so rigid, follow the 80-20 rule. It's better to be moderate. You should be able to eat sweets a little bit. I'm like, that's not easy for me. That's the harder way for me.
Yeah.
For me, the way to do it is to give it up altogether. It's not that one person's right and one person's wrong, or one way's better and one way's worse. It's just like, that's the kind of person that I am as to sweets. With wine, I can be a moderator. I can have half a glass of wine. I don't really care about wine. And then I have a friend who's like, I have no wine, or I have 5 glasses of wine.
Yeah, I feel like a common theme through a lot of the stuff that I have read that you've written is it really, you got to start with self-awareness.
Yes.
Like, you have a journal on your website that it's a lot, which that takes work. I mean, it takes time to sit and be honest with yourself and journal. I mean, I don't know where journaling ranks on the go-to New Year's resolution list, but I have had, of my 40 years, I have to have had 20 where I've been like, all right, this is the year. And I go out and I buy a new journal. Yeah. And it's the nicest journal you've ever seen. I get a new pen, and then by January 21st, it's done, But I think correct me if I'm wrong, but is that like the starting point that people need to go from? Is self-awareness?
It's self-awareness. Some people really like to keep a journal as a way to do that. I don't think you have to keep a journal. There's also like a 1-sentence journal where you just write 1 sentence a day. That's for people who kind of have that itch to keep a journal, but maybe don't have the time and energy to keep it going, it sounds like maybe you have that itch, but like it's hard to keep it up. So 1 sentence a day can be enough to give you that reflection and keep the pattern. But I think sometimes if you don't feel the urge to keep a journal, I think you can just reflect on questions like, well, when have I succeeded in the past? Because a lot of times that holds clues. Or like, I have this quiz called that's about this personality profile that I discovered when I was writing Better Than Before, which is my book about habit formation, which if on this quiz, it tells you if you're an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. And like knowing that category, just that aspect of your nature, which is just one narrow aspect of your nature, that can shed a lot of light on, well, what kind of tools tend to work for you? Because there are certain tools that if you know your tendency, you know that you are more or less likely to succeed with particular, there's so many tools that we can use. Instead of just throwing spaghetti against the wall, taking that quiz, which anybody who wants to take, it's a free quiz. It's at quiz.gretchenrubin.com.
I just took this quiz yesterday.
Oh, well, what tendency are you?
I'm an upholder.
Well, that's what I am too. We're a small group. Yes.
Are we? Okay,
yes.
I gotta be honest. I was a little surprised that that's what I was. B, so I think it's 12 questions, right?
Yeah.
And these questions they're very interesting. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. I felt like half the questions I was like, I need my wife Amy to be here because I feel like her answer would be more accurate maybe than my answer on this. You know what I mean?
What a great idea. Have her take it for you.
I know. I kind of want her to do it for me and see if it's the same.
That's one of those things that at the bottom of the quiz, there's an asterisk that says, if you had your wife take it, then you're an upholder. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, can I ask you a few questions and I'll see if I think you're an upholder?
Please do.
Okay.
Okay.
Do people ever say you're too rigid, like that you should be more flexible? Do you ever hear that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But they may be saying it behind my back every day, all day long.
Everybody
but
does.
I don't think
everybody does.
See, and this is where, like, Dave, I'm like, Dave, you would have a take on this.
I would say
Dave,
no to that.
take it.
I would say no to that.
You would say no. And would you say that if you make up your mind to do something that's important to you, it's pretty easy to follow through with it?
Yes.
Do you feel like you can rely on yourself as much as you can rely on other people, or maybe more?
See, this is one of those questions that I was thinking. I love this question. It feels like a great dinner party question because I don't know what the answer is. My knee jerk is yes. I think I can rely on myself more than I can rely on other people, but I don't know. That's a complicated question, I think.
Yes. Okay. Should I explain the 4 tendencies so then people know what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So what this looks at is a very narrow, and it sounds kind of boring, but it ends up being very juicy aspect of your nature. So it's how you respond to expectations. So we all face 2 kinds of expectations: outer expectations like a work deadline, and inner expectations like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution. So depending on whether you meet or resist an outer or an inner expectation, that's what makes you an upholder, like the 2 of us, questioner, obliger, or rebel. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. They meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. So their motto is, discipline is my freedom. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they resist anything arbitrary, ineffective, unjustified. They tend to love research. They have to know why. So they're making everything an inner expectation. If it meets their inner standard, they'll do something, no problem. If it fails their inner standard, they'll push back. So their motto is, I'll comply if you convince me why. Then there are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So these are people who say, I don't understand why I can keep my promises to other people, but I can't keep my promises to myself. Like very often they will say, I need to learn to put myself first, or I need to make time for myself. What they need is outer accountability, even to meet an inner expectation. So if they need to work out, if they want to work out, they need to work out with a trainer or with a friend who's mad if they don't show up, or take their dog for a run, or raise money for a charity, or whatever it is. They need outer accountability. So their motto is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. And then the last is rebel. And rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they choose to do, anything they want to do. They're very tied to their identity and putting forth their identity and taking a challenge. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically they don't tell themselves what to do. Like they don't sign up for a 10 a.m. spin class on Saturday because they think, I don't know what I'm going to want to do on Saturday. And just the idea that someone's telling me to show up annoys me. So their motto is, you can't make me and neither can I. So the biggest tendency for both men and women is obliger. Upholder is the second smallest tendency.
Yeah. So so there's a lot of people listening that are parents. How do you take these, with kids and you're trying to help them create habits or be more consistent in their decision making around either commitments they make or those kind of things. How do you sort of walk with them through those?
Well, it's interesting because I hear from parents all the time about the 4 tendencies. And in the book, The 4 Tendencies, there are huge sections about parenting because a lot of conflict, when you look at it, has to do with conflict that at the root have tendencies. So for instance, questioner children often get in trouble. They seem disrespectful or insubordinate because they're just like, why? And they'll say things like, well, why am I going to learn the multiplication tables? It's a dumb waste of my time. I can just do it on my phone and it's faster and more accurate. And it's like, you have to take the time to explain to that child why, because otherwise they're just not going to do it. Or like a rebel child, it's like, you got to talk to that rebel child in a way that they want to do it for them. Like they get it and they choose to do it, because you cannot make, I don't know if you've noticed this as a parent, but you cannot make anybody do anything. Like, you just can't keep that going.
Amen.
Yeah.
And I've heard from so many parents of rebel children being like, well, what do I do? Because I have to make them, they have to do it. And I'm like, they don't have to do anything. And they know that. So you've got to work with their tendency. And with obliger children too, it's like a lot of times as parents, we automatically create accountability, which is very good for obliger children. But then they struggle when they don't have that scaffolding. And if we don't understand that's what they need, we might not understand like how to help them set up systems that will allow them to succeed.
God, that's good. Jeez.
So interesting.
Okay, yeah, it's very poignant to talk to the parents of rebels sometimes. Rebels often say that it's good to have a rebel parent because then they get it. Because that's the most different tendency. Yeah, it's the most different from the other 3. People make a lot of mistakes when they're dealing with rebels.
Well, and to your point, because you read it wrong, or it feels like something that is bad, so you want to squash that or discipline it out of them.
Right, because it's all just like if you just came at it in a different way, you can really get to the outcome that you want, but you have to really but it really helps to keep it in mind as you sort of frame the interaction.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I want to move ahead and talk about outer order, inner calm. But before we do, I want to ask you one more question, because I can imagine that we have people listening who, after we read through all your successes and achievements and all that, and then we're talking about, you're going to tell us how to be better at keeping good habits and forming good habits and all that. I would imagine there are some people out there thinking, well, this person is just naturally a high achieving person. She's probably a morning person. She probably ran 20 miles before this interview, et cetera, et cetera. What would you say to those listeners out there who are about to, press stop because they're like, I can't relate to this?
Okay, well, see, this is the thing. So I wrote this book, The Happiness Project, and it was all about these things that I did to be happier. And once the book came out, all these people came up to me and they said, well, how did you get yourself to do all those things? And I said, well, I just decided the things that I thought would make me happier, and then I did them, and then they did make me happier, so then I continued to do them. And they would look at me baffled, and they would say, but how did you get yourself to do them? And I would be equally baffled, and I would say, I don't understand what you're talking about. That's what led me to write my book Better Than Before, and to understand that as an upholder, actually, it's true. I'm the kind of person for whom habit formation comes easily. I'm that kind of person. And so, and there's downsides to being that kind of person, and we can talk about the downsides. But in certain things, it does come more easily to me. And so, and I think for a lot of people, that's very reassuring, which is like, upholders tend to be really good at that. But obligers can be just as good as long as they have outer accountability. And questioners can be just as good as long as they give themselves the reasons. And rebels can be just as good as long as they line it up with their identity and what they choose to do. So it's like, but they kind of have to go through an extra step, whereas upholders are almost too good at it. Like we have to like hold ourselves back from tightening, which is when the rules get tighter and tighter because we're so good at executing on kind of rules. And so it really, I think that because I am so much that kind of person, it helped me to see it in other people. I think obligers, because obliger is a really big group, I think they think, oh, everybody's like this. But I was like, you know what? Not everybody's like me. They're not like me because they're facing challenges I don't face. And I also realized that for a long time I was kind of judgmental because I was like, well, just get it together. I don't have to be your babysitter. Just deal with it and do it. And finally I was like, okay, that's just not practical or helpful or compassionate.
Yeah.
Like people need to have things set up in a different way, but we can all get where we want to go. We just have to have things set up in a different way, which is not that hard once you realize that that's what's needed.
Right. And again, it just starts with self-reflection and what are you? Are you this type of, what's going to work for you?
Right. But like, I'm very rigid. I'm inflexible. I can be kind of a happiness bully. That's what my sister calls me. So I have all kinds of faults related to that. They're just, they're just of a different kind.
Well, too, and too, it's something that, and I need to hear this because I think I'm with y'all. The first child in me is hearing everything.
Yeah, I think the three of us are similar.
Go do it. Just get up and do it.
Right.
But I think it's just a reminder. You have to have a lot of space for different. I know that this is such an elementary thing to say, but it's true. I have to hold a lot of space for people who just don't work like I do. And I think the problem is the world, so many books in the world is set up for people that are probably more like us. So that is the general consensus. And so it's easy to sort of get around your buddies and go like, oh, look at this. Come on. Oh, he's going to have trouble. When you realize that
and that's
just
when
really
you get
are wired
upholders together.
Yes.
If you get upholders together, like we're 3 upholders together, that's what they start talking about is why can't people just like get it together?
Yeah.
Like, let's just do it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, but I think what's helpful about the 4 tendencies framework is it sort of tells you how people are different, not just that people are different, but like,
this is how,
and therefore knowing what the patterns are, what would you do to a person who says to you, I don't understand why I never miss a deadline at work, but I'm not able to do this at home. I'm so deeply committed to writing a novel in my free time. It's the most important thing to me. Why can't I do it? I can be like, oh, you're an obliger. Here's 5 different ways you can give yourself outer accountability, and you can execute on that instead of just saying like, what's wrong with me? Other people are better. I'm a failure.
Kids are so interesting because it's a front row view to, for me, it has been like, I have 3 kids and they are very different and they were born that way.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh yes, this people really do just come out of the womb like, I don't care.
Yes.
And I'm like, why would you not care? Like, I just don't care. And I'm like,
right.
Right. But each of the tendencies has so much power. Like I've realized, like I'm married to a questioner and it's so valuable to me because he's like, well, why would you do that? And I'm like, that's a great question. Why would I do that?
You're like,
but rebels are free because they're just rebels are just like, I'm not going to do that. And it's like, there's so much freedom and power in that. But then when you want to help somebody achieve an aim for themselves, it's like, I think, and you're right, upholders often are the people writing these books because we're like, we love this kind of thing and we're good at it. And we think if people would just do what we do, they would be fine. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't work. It just took me a long time to be like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. But everybody can get there. And they don't have to change their nature. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to be a this, I want to be that. I'm like, well, can you change your own nature? Probably not. And if so, it'd be very difficult. Just change your surroundings. Just give yourself outer accountability or tie it to an identity and you'll get where you want to go. And that's so much easier.
Well, when I took that test, there was a part of me that wants to be, when I was kind of reading the description of the rebel, there's a part of me that like, I kind of want to be that, but I am not that,
Right.
I just am not. And I think it's great that, like you said, you don't have to change how you are to be able to change and implement some of the things that you want to change and implement. But another thing that I have a love-hate relationship with myself about is order and tidiness and cleanliness and all that kind of stuff. And when I have the audiobook of Outer Order Inner Calm, and I was listening to it yesterday, and I just wrote down here on my notes, visual noise, yes, like 10 exclamation points. So I'm curious, you in this book, you're talking about how, your environment can really shape your mood, et cetera, which I totally agree with. And it sounds like we're probably in the same, category when it comes to that. But, a lot of my close friends and my wife is not in that same category. Often we will be like, we'll have the family down for the holidays and everyone's sitting in the living room having a great time talking and getting to know each other. Well, getting to know each other. We're family. Like, hey, you're still talking about real things. And I'm the idiot in the kitchen cleaning up. And as I'm doing it, I'm like, this is so stupid. A, I should be in there with the family. They live 2 states away. They're not here for very long. B, this is futile. There are like 10 kids in this house. Why am I even cleaning the kitchen again? But I just can't help myself. Mm-hmm. Help me, Gretchen. Help me.
Well, I have to say, it's such a source of conflict among people who live together, or also people who work together, especially now that there's like open plan, because people just have very different settings for where they feel comfortable. For some people,
right.
Some people are clutter blind. Like my sister, Elizabeth, who's the co-host of the Happier podcast with me, mm-hmm. she's truly clutter blind. Like she doesn't see it. She would not close a kitchen cabinet door if she didn't live with someone else. She's got heaps of mail on every counter. I mean, I just like, I go in there and I'm like, I can't rest until we start tackling this, but she doesn't care. So there's clutterblind people, but then there are people who are just like, they just have a different level. Some people, it's like everything has to be at like right angles. And then some people, like there's all different gradations. Right. And again, I think what's helpful is not to say, well, I'm right and you're wrong. Because a lot of times people sort of want to make it into an issue. Like, I'm going to show you this research that shows that people are more creative in a messy lab. Therefore, I'm right. Or saying things like, look, if you want it to be tidy, knock yourself out. But I'm not going to participate in that because I don't care. And it's like, but then you're free riding off of my efforts. You get to live in this like tidy, clean, well-run household. But I'm doing all the work because you just have a higher tolerance. So what you have to, I think it's much more helpful to say, like, we might have different preferences. How do we create an environment where we both feel comfortable? And so, like, if you're the messier one, are there a few certain practices that you could follow that would, like, really bring down the tension for the other person? And if you're the neater one, can you confine the mess in certain areas so that you feel more comfortable so you're not, like, up on your feet every 10 seconds? Tidying.
Yeah.
And then there's certain things too that you can do that just make it easier, which is like in my family it was hooks instead of hangers. No one could be bothered to do the incredibly difficult work of hanging up a coat on a hanger. But we got
11 steps. Yeah.
I mean, people. Yeah. And we got hooks and people will do hooks. So sometimes you can find these little solutions. But you're right. I think people just are very different.
Yeah. And I need to go on the record and state my wife is not messy. Mm-hmm. She has a and I'm saying this for you, Amy, as you're listening to this in a couple weeks. I often am the one thinking like I need to get down to a normal level. I feel like she lives in the normal world and I'm too far over here and I just can't relax, until the end.
Like what kinds of things bother you?
Gretchen, it is a plastic bag, an empty plastic bag or full, whatever, on the counter. Mm-hmm. That's right there. It's like, that's ruining the whole thing. Unless the whole house around it is spotless, then maybe I could tolerate a plastic bag. A slightly open drawer, a slightly open door, that kind of thing. Just those things, the normal things.
I love that so much.
But it's tough for me to just block that out. Right. I think I'm getting better at it, but it's tough for me to block that out.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is. And then there's also abundance lovers and simplicity lovers. I don't know where you fall on this. It sounds like maybe we're kind of the same, but like simplicity lovers, like bear counters, not much going on, maybe like one little vase with one little rosebud, whereas abundance lovers like profusion and choice and buzz and piles and collections. And there's like a lot going on. My daughter is an abundance lover and I walk into her room and I'm like, how can you handle this? It's so much, but none of it's clutter. Like it's all exactly the way she wants it to be. It's exactly where she wants it to be. There's nothing that's not purposeful. So it's not clutter because clutter is like stuff that's in the wrong place or that you don't even know what it is or it's broken or it doesn't work or it's just, it's just in the way. So her stuff is not like that, but it's a visual environment that is not appealing to me at all, but it's her room. So I'm like, okay, if you want to cover literally every surface, there's stuff hanging. I mean, she's got more stuff in there than I could have ever dreamed of doing. And it kind of drives me bonkers, but she loves it.
So that's the point that's why I think Tony the Tiger would have been a black belt, at least in Kung Fu.
I cannot disagree more.
Oh, well, okay. So let me ask you this, John. Do you believe And can you believe, it's both of those, do and can, that it's already 2023? We're literally living in the future, John.
That we are. Now that I can agree with.
Okay, that's fair.
And would 15-year-old Dave Barnes believe that his future self would have a signature coffee blend with Methodical Coffee of all coffee companies?
I know. I'd have to say that was not on Young DB's vision board. I mean, and I can tell you how much better my day is when I started off with some Dadville blend.
My gosh.
I didn't even, little Dave wouldn't have known that either.
No.
That he would want to start every day with just a little Methodical.
If only he knew what you now know that he didn't know
then.
Look, let me tell you, Methodical isn't just the name of their business. It's their approach to everything.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Methodical's been roasting and hosting for over 8 years and offer a wide selection of coffees and teas that are complex yet easygoing, just like you, Dave Barnes.
I knew you were going to say that. It's true. It's true. I won that superlative in high school. If you had to describe yourself as a coffee, John, what would you be? Go.
Tall, skinny, soy milk latte. You?
Gosh, I'm not quite the elite coffee influencer that you are, but my ideal mix would include hints of chocolate, graham, and brown sugar.
Oh, brown sugar. That's what I was going to say. Look, this is incredible because that's the exact flavor profile that Dadville blend is, Dave.
Isn't that weird?
That's right.
So
Just
weird.
head over to methodicalcoffee.com and find brew guides that'll teach you how to turn your coffee brewing chore into a beloved ritual.
I see what you did there. We all love a good coffee ritual. Craft a cup you'll love with Methodical Coffee. Get 10% off your first order when you head to methodicalcoffee.com and use the code DADVILLE.
That's methodicalcoffee.com and use the code DADVILLE.
It's 100% guaranteed to make you a better parent.
Okay, are we allowed to say that?
Yeah.
So when you said in your book, have nothing in your house that you do not believe is useful or beautiful, ask yourself, do I need it? Do I love it? Do I use it? She would say, yeah, that's all the thing. I did that, and this is all that's left.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She'd be like, oh, I love it all.
Yeah.
Every little plastic mushroom, love it. Exactly where it's supposed to be. Yeah.
So do you have a discipline? Is there, I was wondering the exact same thing John just asked. Do you have a discipline around that for yourself, or do you advise? I mean, the what's the woman's name that got so popular last year?
Marie Kondo.
Yes, with her whole practice of decluttering and having some kind of system in your house to these things. But do you find that you advise and or have something in your life or sort of push others to have where you're doing a seasonal or quarterly or yearly sort of like, okay, let's get in there and get rid of some things we're not doing? We were just in New York last week. We ended our London trip in New York for a friend's wedding, and we stayed in a friend's place on the Upper West Side. And it's just, I was like, something I envy about, I know you're in New York, right?
Yeah.
Something I envy about the space in New York is it is so limited. So it's like you can't, I really found myself looking around my friend's apartment, and he's got 2 girls, and I was like, there's something, it feels really cramped to me because, we live here in Nashville, Tennessee, and, we have more space. But it's like, there's something wonderful about, you can't just go buy stuff. It's like, where are you going to put it?
Right.
So it's almost, it's just a part of your life as a New Yorker because, you just don't have the space. But I think, for the people who don't live in that, where it'd be a little easier to be like, we can't buy this. Like, there's literally not room for this lamp or this, TV this size or whatever. Do you find yourself kind of advising some system that's like, okay, twice a year, go through your stuff, or even how would you do that?
I mean, I think it's great. I think that for some people that's not very practical.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of kind of like the constant low level sweeps through. So like one thing that's really good is like just like one shelf or one drawer. Just pull out one drawer in your kitchen and look through it and be like, do I toss it because it's like the lid to a to-go cup that we don't even have anymore? Am I going to donate it because we have 3 screwdrivers and we only need 1 screw? Three wine openers and we only need one corkscrew is the word I'm searching for. So I'm going to give away 1 because 2 is plenty, maybe more than we need. Or is it in the wrong place? And you just do a little bit at a time. Or if you're bothered by mess, the 1 minute rule is a great thing to tackle mess. Which is anything you can do in less than a minute, you do without delay. So you put a dirty coffee mug in the dishwasher, or you open up a piece of mail, realize it's junk mail, and toss it. You hang up your coat on a hook instead of throwing it over a chair. And that gets rid of kind of a scum of clutter. But for like getting rid of things, I think it's often like Marie Kondo says, like, take everything out of your closet, put it in a giant pile and go through it. That works for some people, but for some people that's just unrealistic. They don't have the time, and they would just would just be totally overwhelmed by that. But you can just be like, let me look at my shirts. You know what? I've got 7 button-down white shirts, 3 of which I hate because they're too tight and scratchy. Okay, why don't I give those away? Because I'm never going to wear my 7th least favorite white shirt, you know? So I think sometimes you can do it like shelf by shelf, drawer by drawer. But it really does help also to have a place where you know you're going to give things away. I think for a lot of people, knowing where something is going to go, you're like, I'm not wearing this shirt, but for somebody else, it could be like a great bargain, or like this pot, I'm not using it, but for someone else, it could really serve a great purpose. It's just as wasteful to leave it unused on my shelf as it would be to just throw it away. So why don't I let it go back into circulation and being like, okay, and I'm going to put it in this box, and on Saturday, I'm going to take this box to this place where I will donate it. For a lot of people, that makes it easier. Or like if you know, like a young family that really would love your toys and your, in your hand-me-downs, or a library that sells books to raise money. That can make
one
a lot
of the great hacks that I ever heard with closets was to, at the beginning of years to be now, you face them all the same direction. Do you know this hack?
The hangers. Yeah, you put the hangers in backwards.
And then, 6 months, whatever, a year, 3 months, whatever you determine the time, what you haven't turned around and used, you give away or sell or whatever. And there's little things like that I'm like, man, that would, or I have friends who are like, I don't buy a pair of shoes until I'm done with, something has to go if something comes in. Just little ways to sort of, simplify, and to your point, sort of declutter. And I love your idea that never label anything miscellaneous, because
I know. I made that mistake.
Turns into
and then there are overbuyers and underbuyers. Like underbuyers tend not to buy things even when they need them, but then overbuyers tend to overbuy. And one thing that can help you if you're an overbuyer is to say, I'm going to store it at the store. So you're like, oh, I if I were going on a foreign trip, this money bag would be perfect. You can say, yes, it would be, but I'm just going to store it at the store. They'll take good care of it for me. And then if I need it, I can go get it. Or this would make a great gift for somebody. It's like, but I don't need to buy a gift for somebody right now. I'll just store it at the store. And then when I need a gift, I can go get it. Because sometimes overbuyers are like, oh, I gotta get my hands on that right now. And then they have to deal with all this stuff.
Yeah.
That is genius.
Is really good.
I love that. My thing.
I'm going to try to use it on my kids. Guys, we're just going to store this here at the store.
We can go visit it.
Yeah, let's go look at it.
I used to tell my daughter, that's just for display. She'd be like, oh, can I get that? I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's not for sale. That's just display only. And she'd be like, oh, what are you going to do?
She was 16,
then she learned to read.
Like, wait a minute.
Yeah, she learned to read, and then the game was
like,
up.
Why do they have 9 of them then, Mom? Just hanging there. They have 9 displays of that shirt.
It's like people need to take a look. Yeah, she completely said, oh, it's for safety. From both of my children, if I'd be like, oh, that's for safety. We have to do this for safety.
Oh,
they were
my God. Okay. That is genius.
Yeah.
So you have 2 kids, is that right?
I have 2 daughters, yeah.
2 daughters. Okay, same here. And how old are your daughters?
23 and 17, so I have big kids.
Wow, you're almost you're almost free.
Okay,
yeah.
So I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, both daughters. What would you say to me? What's your advice to me? If you could go back and talk to, Gretchen when your daughters were around that age, is there some advice that you would give to me at this time?
Yes, and this is advice that I got from my favorite parenting book of all time, which is called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. I love this book. It's just as good for adults as it is for children. It's an amazing book. It's so fun to read. And it sounds so simple, but it totally revolutionized my parenting. And it's acknowledge the reality of other people's feelings. So with children, it's very tempting to tell them they don't feel what they say they're feeling. Like, well, you're not hungry. We just ate. Or you can't still be hungry, or, oh, you're going to have fun at that party. You always love a party, or you're not afraid of clowns, or it'll be fun at grandma's house, or how can you, like, of course you're cold.
You threw the clowns in there, by the way.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Oh my gosh. My daughter was terrified of clowns. And I'm like, you're not afraid of clowns. It's like, yes, she was afraid of clowns.
Yeah.
But the thing is you just acknowledge the reality. Like, oh, we just ate, but you still feel hungry. Or, wow, I feel like it's so cold outside, but you feel like you don't need a coat. Or, that's really annoying. It just allows people to stop insisting on how they feel. And kind of a corollary to that is acknowledge their desires in like as a wish, like which is part of acknowledging what somebody else wants. So if somebody's like, well, I don't want this for breakfast, I want Cheerios. And you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had a magic wand and I would make those Cheerios appear for you instantly. Or, it's so cold outside, we can't go out. I know, like, oh my gosh, I wish that if this were Harry Potter, I would change the weather. Because again, it's like, I understand how you feel and I wish that I could help you, but I can't. Because a lot of times with children, what I realized, at least with my own children, is they were just so frustrated. And then once it was like, I hear what you're saying, like it just really took a lot of conflict away. And it's sort of surprising to a surprising degree how effective and it's just as effective with adults. Like, wow, it was really annoying to have to wait for the cable guy who was 3 hours late. That, that's super annoying. Yeah. Instead of just being like, well, that's no big deal. You were just working at home anyway. What do you care? It's like, don't acknowledge the reality of somebody's feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
So I'm curious, we have a lot of parents that listen to the podcast, and of the books and knowledge that you've gained and sort of amassed and put together, like, where do you feel like that intersects what you just said, but like that as you've discovered and written and sort of gathered all these books and things, so this may be something where like it would take hours to answer, but is there like a consolidated take on where you feel like that knowledge intersects with parenting, or things that you've found over the years, like a few bullet points where you're like, man, these things have just been really helpful for me as I've learned with my kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like a huge theme on the Happier with Gretchen Rubin podcast, because my sister and I talk about things like this all the time. If I were like, what are the key takeaways? First of all, I'd be like, always like manage the body, because your body is, your physical experience always colors your emotional experience. So we think about this with our children, but it's just as important for adults as parents, which is make sure you get enough sleep. Make sure you don't let yourself, treat yourself like a toddler. Make sure you're not too hungry or too cold. Make sure that you have time to play. You have downtime. Maybe you need more silence. Maybe you need more time with friends. Like, think about like what you need, and even to your physical body. Because I think sometimes people let themselves just get exhausted, and then everything is hard at parenting, most of all, maybe. And then you're not the kind of parent you want to be. Then you're disappointed with yourself, and that makes you angry. Then you're more stressed out. Then you do even worse. It's that terrible cycle.
Well, I was going to say quickly, one thing I thought about this literally this morning as I was reading through this. It's funny you bring it up. Like, there is something, and you have to be careful with this methodology, but there is something I've adopted with, when you fly on the plane, they're always like, make sure parents, put your mask on before the kids. And you got to be really careful with this again. But there is something that's really beautiful about that in a lot of parenting I've found, where if I'll kind of make sure it's in obviously you want to be a servant and make sure your kids are okay. But there's a lot of times where I'm like, if I make sure that I'm sort of squared away, they tend to do well. Like, kids are a lot more malleable than I think we give them credit for. And so what I find myself doing, and I think a lot of parents struggle, is we'll over-serve or we'll bend ourselves way out of whack to get them happy when they're much more bendable than we are. And so I've laughed at myself because I've sort of adopted that into other parts of my life where I'm like, I'm going to make sure I'm okay in this moment before I do them, because if I can get squared away, I bet they're going to be good too, as opposed to putting all of us out trying to make them happy, which is always a little bit of a moving target.
100%. It's 100%. And in the Happiness Project, I have my like 8 splendid truths of happiness, which are like the big principles. And one of them is, one of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy. But one of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. And so they work together. It's not really like one or the other, but it's like, it's like if you, and a lot of time, and you can't make someone else be happy, but happier people tend to make other people happier. It's very infectious. And I do think it's the kind of thing, like if you're exhausted or if you're very resentful or you have no time for yourself. And also, example is more persuasive than badgering. Like if you're like, it's important to get enough sleep, therefore I go to bed at 10:30. That's more compelling than it's important for you to get enough sleep, therefore I stay up till 2 a.m. binge watching Mad Men.
Right.
It's like part of, if you think your children should read, are you reading?
Yeah.
If you think your children should exercise, are you exercising regularly? Like if you think it's important that your children do your homework, are you working on your novel in your free time that you keep talking about? Like, that's great. I think that you're right, that those things really, really go together. And another thing I think is just to realize like people are different. I mean, a lot of times when I hear people talk about their children, I'm like, I don't think that there's an issue. I mean, I think your child is a different way from you. And you just are like, well, why isn't my child, my child should be like out there and like all they want to do is like stay home and read. And it's like, yeah, but you're a really high energy outdoorsy family. And maybe your child's a little different. Or sometimes people are like really upbeat, cheerful people. And they're like, oh, my child's just sort of always kind of quiet and glum. I'm like, well, maybe that a lot of like our happiness level, there's a big genetic component. And some people are Tiggers and some people are Eeyores. And, sometimes people are just have a different setting. And, or you see this with gregariousness, like some parents, like they're super gregarious and then their children are more introverted or the children are really gregarious and the introverted parents are like, oh my gosh, our child is talking to every stranger at the swimming pool. And it's like, oh, I really don't want to get into that. But like they're just chatting up the whole world.
Yeah.
And it's not that one person's right or one person's wrong or that you need to, it's just like, well, let's respect because you said it like a little while ago, they come out different.
Yeah.
You get what you get and you don't get upset.
Yeah, right.
Some of it you can train up or shape, and some of it is just it's who they are, and it's more like how do we get you where you want to go for yourself and respect those differences.
It's really fascinating how much Jon and I, like when we have experts like yourself on who have studied these things, especially in the child psychology space. One of the most consistent things we hear is how important it is to know your kids, and that sounds unbelievably pedestrian, but really knowing them, knowing like, okay, to your point, how do we set them up to succeed, or how do we get to know them, and especially, and it's, if there's anything I'm learning as an adult, and I just referenced this a minute ago, but like holding space for people that are just different, and it's hard too when you kind of have like the Barnes family, we do this, and you have to be careful about those things. In fact, one of the meeting with a therapist years ago, one of the first questions he asks all of his clients, a bunch of us have seen him, is like, what was like the Barnes family motto, and like if you think about your childhood, what is the phrase you heard the most? And it's a really terrifying thing to think about as a parent, because you do even
stop that.
Yeah, or like boys don't cry, or whatever the thing is. You kind of realize like, oh man, we are communicating things to our kids that feel global, that really aren't fair to who they are sometimes, because that may work for me, but man, my little introverted kid may be like, no, you don't do that, because it just
I want to have
me.
3 friends for a birthday party. I don't want to have the whole class.
Yeah, and so there's something, again, like Jon said at the beginning of us talking to you, there really is so much power, not just in knowing ourselves well, but especially with our kids, really knowing like, man, okay, these are little personalities that I'm trying to maintain, and so it's not fair for me to sort of throw these overarching things on them that may not serve them well or set them up to be the best versions of themselves.
The challenging part, I think, for ourselves and and as parents too, is like, on the one hand, we want to accept ourselves, and we also want to expect more from ourselves. Yeah. So we want to accept like the truth of our nature and not push beyond the like what is sort of like the heart, like the boundaries of like who we are. Right. And we want to respect that for ourselves and for our children. But we also want to expect more from ourselves and push ourselves and not stay in our comfort zones, and really decide like, well, how can I grow and change and challenge myself? But those look very different for different people. And and I think there's no easy answer. I think each of us has to figure this out for ourselves. And I think as parents, we want to know our children so that we can gently help them to expect more of themselves and to give them the scaffolding they need to feel like they can do that and risk failure and discomfort and all that. But we need to do the same thing ourselves.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And it's hard because it's just a tension that cannot be ever finally, established because it's always changing.
Well, too, I would imagine you know this so well with how old your girls are. They're very different than they were probably a decade ago.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
100%.
Like little things that you thought, I got her. This is her thing. And then 3 years later, you're like, no, it's not, and especially in their 20s and, navigating all that.
But one of the things that's a delight about having older children is they surprise you. Like my older daughter is super resourceful. My husband is really resourceful. I am not resourceful at all. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, Eliza, you're resourceful. This is great. And she was like, you know what? I am resourceful. And I was like, that is a great quality. And it's sort of, as a child, it doesn't really emerge that much because you're like,
yeah, that's right.
You don't have a credit card. Like,
that's right.
You can't call somebody and have a handyman come over, whatever. So it is really exciting when you see like these things, because you're right. Like, they're changing, they're emerging, I mean, I feel like, my father, I think about the way my father has changed and evolved over my entire lifetime.
Wow.
I mean, we're not, my mother too, so, but you're right. As parents, we have a special obligation to try to have a larger perspective than they have, and to kind of try to guide their path.
Well, and I can't imagine the patience you have to have, especially I would assume with like where your older daughter is, where she's in her 20s now and is in the space, I remember sitting with our therapist years ago, and both my wife and I have pretty big personalities, and we were talking about how quiet our firstborn was, and he was like, do you know the two of you? Like, where is the space? And it was like, yeah, it's true. And I would imagine as she is growing and, getting out from under the two of y'all, there's probably parts of her that have come to light that you're like, well, you never did that here. And it's like, well, yeah, there wasn't. That's because I was with y'all. And now I'm out, flying on my own, and this is how I work, which has got to be really amazing and fun, but also I'm sure requiring a lot of patience, because you can't do the old, well, this is the algorithm that works with you. And they're like, well, not anymore. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I'm now that I've gotten out from under this, I've bloomed in different ways, and I have different interests, and these are the things that I want to do with my life, that you have to go like, okay.
I remember when my older daughter was in preschool. So it was the first time she was like doing, and they do the separation thing where like they go in for an hour or whatever.
Yeah.
And all the mothers and fathers were like, on the sidelines, very anxious. And the head of the preschool, who's the super wise woman, said, this is the first of many times that you will say goodbye to your child.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, oh my gosh, that just like went through my heart, and I've never forgotten it. But it's like, that is a big part of being a parent. It's like, you need to let go at the same time that you need to hold on. And so, it's like, there are all these sort of paradoxes that we have to manage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that I was really excited to talk to you, one of the reasons why I was really excited to talk to you, is because this field that you have taken on of like human behavior, if we say it that way, I would think that it would be it feels like a really unifying field of study, I would think. Like, we have all these ways that we feel divided from each other, geographically, like you are a New Yorker, we live in Nashville, religion, political views, et cetera, all these ways that we feel like we're in these little camps, for better or for worse or whatever. But your field of study really feels to me like, I bet it would be really refreshing, and kind of like you would feel sort of the unification of just people by studying human behavior. You know what I mean? Do you feel like through your studies you have become more empathetic in general, just because you kind of always have an eye on that 30,000-foot view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just thinking through, trying to understand other people's perspective. And it's interesting too, because so I have this podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And so my sister and I are always talking about like sort of strategies and ideas and hacks for how to be happier, healthier, more productive, more creative. And we get a ton of emails back from listeners. Like, we'll be like, here's this idea. What did you do with it? And I'll hear from people where like their context is so wildly different from mine. I mean, like in 1,000 ways, I'm like, this person and we have almost no overlap, except they listen to my podcast. And it's so great because you say like, well, this is how this person is taking the same idea and translating it into their context and getting to a place that's very, constructive. Yeah. And so I think it really has made me understand that you can get very distracted by certain differences, but you can also focus on the things that are more unified. And like one thing, I mean, and I'm sure you guys hear about this all the time, it's like family traditions. In my experience, people are very interested in family traditions. People with young children are very, like, they want to think ahead about like, what are some good family traditions we can do? As parents, you're sort of like in charge of like, well, what are our traditions? Like, what do we do on the 4th of July? And how do we hang on to memories? And do we take a photograph on the first day of school? And all these things. Like, this is something that it seems like just about everybody in the world really thinks about. And to me, that was really heartwarming. I'm like, people really want to have loving, warm family traditions, and they're interested in kind of easy, manageable ways to do that. They don't want something too complicated, like we've all got enough with what's on our plate. With like what happened to Halloween, right? That thing is ballooned out of control. But you see that like their idea of what that would be might be very different. Their taste might be very different. The way it's shaped might be very different. But at its core, it comes from the same desire to like, build strong family connections and memories over time. And I'm like, it's great.
That's great. Okay, so when this episode comes out, people are going to be listening to it at a time that, according to the internet, based on the copious amounts of research that I have done on New Year's resolutions, people. I think it was January 21st, some article I was reading was saying like 90% of New Year's resolutions have failed by January 21st. So a lot of people will be listening to this around this time. A lot of people will be listening to this with the shame of, another New Year's resolution failed again. Do you have any parting sort of advice to those listeners in this time?
Absolutely. Okay, so the day you're talking about, I'm very aware of that, which I call in my mind discouragement day, because this is when people are like very discouraged with themselves. Yeah. So I'm like, let's reframe it. Let's call it determination day. So I'm a big fan of using dates as a catalyst for reflection and change. So, okay, like call it, just pick your date for determination day, evaluate where you are. And if something's just not working, being like, okay, I wanted to exercise consistently. I decided that my New Year's resolution was that I was going to get up and run for a mile every morning, first thing. I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay determined, but now I'm going to try it a different way, because maybe I didn't set myself up for success. Maybe I should go for a mile walk on my lunch hour, or maybe I should go for a mile run at the end of my day. Or maybe I need to borrow my neighbor's dog because I know that dog needs a lot. It'd be so much more fun for me if I had a dog with me, or whatever it might be. But so to use that date to sort of reevaluate what's working, what's not working, and not be like, okay, I'm a failure. And probably for a lot of people, they're like, I'm discouraged because I maybe let myself down again. I've done it in the past. But to really say, let me start again and maybe try it in a different way. Because there's a lot, we can all get where we're going, but there's so many different paths to it. And again, this is back to the 4 tendencies. Like, maybe what you need is outer accountability. Or maybe you're a rebel and everybody kept telling you, oh, just put it on the calendar and do it. But you don't like to have things on the calendar. And the minute that it's on the calendar, you resist it. So you've actually done something that's very counterproductive. Or maybe everybody's telling you to do it, but you're a questioner and you're like, well, I don't understand. Like, everybody's saying I should run a mile in the morning, but why should I run instead of walk? And why in the morning instead of in the night? And why a mile instead of 3/4 of a mile? It's like, get clear on that, and your actions will follow. So use it as determination day.
Look at
That's
you.
great.
Okay, so first of all, thank you a million times for being on.
Yes.
This
is so fun.
Okay, so we always ask 2 questions before we end. I'll ask the first one. What is the one thing you want your kids to know?
Themselves. Yeah, self-knowledge. Yep.
That's good.
Oh, that's great.
That's good.
Okay, last question. What do you want your girls to say at your funeral? I never doubted for a moment that my mother loved me with all her heart.
Yeah, that's great. Good. That's good. Thank you a million
Hey, can I just ask?
Just kidding. Just Jon
perhaps the most important question.
There we go.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
With all your knowledge, all the millions of books you have sold, the millions of podcast downloads, which, by the way, you and your sister won an award for your podcast. That's not even on your brag sheet. But I remember reading that somewhere. The toilet paper roll, when we put it on.
Right? Over or under?
Is it over or under? What's the best way?
Hey, there's no one right way.
That's not the answer I was looking for, Gretchen.
Okay, it's over. You got to feel it. You got to feel it.
It's got to be over.
You just know. You just know it.
You just.
You'll feel what's right.
Oh my gosh. Dadville.